What day was Jesus crucified? A spoken presentation based on a biblical and chronological analysis of the 3 days and 3 nights. Let us begin with the central question, what day was Jesus crucified? The Bible does not directly say Jesus was crucified on Thursday. It also does not directly say Jesus was crucified on Friday. So the question must be answered by comparing the timing statements in the gospel accounts and testing each proposed view by the same biblical standard. This study argues that the Thursday crucifixion view provides the strongest overall harmonization. It best accounts for Jesus' statement that the Son of Man would be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. It also accounts for the Greek time expressions used in the Gospels. The first day of the week discovery while it was still dark, the High Sabbath mentioned by John, the spice passages involving the women, and Jesus' statement on the cross, "Today you shall be with me in paradise." The conclusion is not that the Bible explicitly names Thursday. It does not. The conclusion is that Thursday is the strongest inference when Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday are tested by the same biblical measuring tool. Matthew chapter 12, verse 40, must be treated as the controlling sign. Jesus said, "For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the sea monster, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." Matthew 12:40 is not merely one timing phrase among several. It is the sign Jesus himself gave. Therefore, it should govern the chronological analysis. It should not be softened in order to fit a preferred tradition. The sign contains 2 elements, 3 days and 3 nights. A proposed chronology that cannot naturally account for the 3 nights fails the plain force of the sign. But a proposed chronology that stretches beyond the 3rd day also creates tension. So the strongest view will be the one that satisfies the sign of Jonah without forcing the rest of the gospel timing statements. The Greek time expressions must be handled carefully. The analysis should not depend on loose English wording or on mistranslating a preposition. There are several important expressions. First, there is the phrase "after 3 days." In Greek, Mark uses the preposition meta with the accusative case. This should be allowed to mean after 3 days. Second, there is the phrase "in 3 days." In John, the preposition "in" is used with the dative case. This should be allowed to mean in 3 days. Third, there is the expression "the 3rd day." This is a dative time expression. Depending on the context, it can carry the sense of on, at, by, or to the 3rd day. And fourth, there is Matthew 12:40 itself. 3 days and 3 nights. That is a direct count of days and nights. These expressions do not overthrow Matthew 12:40. They must be harmonized within the controlling sign Jesus gave. The question then is this: which proposed crucifixion day can satisfy 3 days and 3 nights, while also explaining the language of after 3 days, in 3 days, and the 3rd day? In Luke chapter 23, verse 43, Jesus said to the man on the cross, "Truly I say to you, today you shall be with me in paradise." This statement supports counting the crucifixion day itself. Jesus did not speak as though the relevant post-death period would begin the next day. Jesus said, "Today you shall be with me in paradise." Even though only a portion of that day remained, that day belonged to the death, burial, and resurrection chronology. This is consistent with inclusive reckoning, in which part of a day can be counted as a day within a reckoned period. The argument does not require the crucifixion day to contain a full 12-hour daylight period after Jesus died. It only requires that the day on which he died be counted as the first day. That is important. Jesus does refer elsewhere to the 12 hours of daylight in a day. But the resurrection chronology does not require 3 complete 12-hour daylight periods and 3 complete 12-hour night periods beginning at the exact moment of death. Luke 23:43 shows that the partial day of the crucifixion should not be excluded from the count. Modern Western reckoning begins the day at midnight. Jewish reckoning begins the day at evening. That means that when the weekly Sabbath ended at sunset Saturday, the first day of the week began immediately, even though it was still dark. John chapter 20 verse 1 states that Mary Magdalene came early to the tomb on the first day of the week while it was still dark, and she saw the stone already taken away from the tomb. That verse directly tells us the timing of Mary's arrival. It also tells us that the stone had already been taken away, but it does not state the exact hour of the resurrection. So a resurrection after the Sabbath ended, but before sunrise would be after the Sabbath, on the first day of the week and during the dark portion of that day. This matters because Saturday night, in modern language, is already the first day of the week in Jewish reckoning. John chapter 19 verse 31 says, "For that Sabbath was a high day." John identifies the Sabbath following the crucifixion as a high day. This supports the presence of a feast Sabbath connected with Passover and unleavened bread, not merely the regular weekly Sabbath. The first day of unleavened bread was a holy convocation. A Thursday crucifixion allows Friday to be the High Sabbath and Saturday to be the weekly Sabbath. This creates a coherent back-to-back Sabbath framework. Jesus is crucified and buried before sunset on Thursday. Friday is the High Sabbath. Saturday is the weekly Sabbath. Then after the weekly Sabbath ends at sunset Saturday, the first day of the week begins. The spice passages must be handled carefully. Luke records that the women saw the tomb, returned, prepared spices and perfumes, and rested on the Sabbath according to the commandment. Mark records that when the Sabbath was over, the women bought spices so that they might anoint him. The Wednesday view has an advantage at this point because it provides a gap between a high Sabbath and the weekly Sabbath. That gap can be used for buying and preparing spices. That advantage should be acknowledged honestly. However, the spice texts do not defeat Thursday. Under a Thursday crucifixion view, the women could have prepared what they already had before the Sabbath, rested through the high Sabbath and weekly Sabbath, and bought additional spices after the Sabbath ended Saturday evening. Mark and Luke may be describing different parts of the same preparation process rather than giving a complete minute-by-minute sequence. Therefore, the spice passages give Wednesday a localized advantage. But they do not solve Wednesday's larger problem of running too long, nor do they rescue Friday from the problem of failing to supply 3 nights. Each proposed crucifixion day must be weighed by the same standard. The analysis cannot change the standard for one view and then use a different standard for another. If the whole day sequence is being considered, then Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday must all be tested the same way. The question is simple. If the crucifixion day is day 1, what happens after 3 counted days? With Friday, the count works like this. Friday daylight is day 1. Friday night is night 1. Saturday daylight is day 2. Saturday night is night 2. The early first day of the week is only the beginning of day 3. That may explain on the 3rd day by inclusive counting, but it does not naturally provide 3 nights. So Friday has a serious problem with Matthew 12:40. With Wednesday, the count works like this. Wednesday daylight is day 1. Wednesday night is night 1. Thursday daylight is day 2. Thursday night is night 2. Friday daylight is day 3. Friday night is night 3. But then Saturday daylight still remains before a resurrection after the weekly Sabbath. That creates the opposite problem. Wednesday can supply 3 nights, but it tends to run too long before a post-Sabbath resurrection. With Thursday, the count works like this. Thursday daylight is day 1. Thursday night is night 1. Friday daylight is day 2. Friday night is night 2. Saturday daylight is day 3. Saturday night after sunset is night 3. And after the weekly Sabbath ends, the first day of the week has begun. This allows the tomb to be empty before sunrise on the first day of the week. From this perspective, Thursday fits the after 3 days language most cleanly. Thursday, Friday, and Saturday have passed. Then after the Sabbath ends, the first day of the week begins while it is still dark. Friday cannot use that same standard without pushing the resurrection beyond Sunday. Wednesday satisfies 3 nights but adds too much time before a post-Sabbath resurrection. This same measuring tool is crucial. A criticism against Thursday is only decisive if Friday or Wednesday solves the same issue without creating a greater problem. They do not. The Thursday view can be understood from 2 related perspectives. First, there is the death and burial count. Second, there is the whole day calendar sequence. These are not contradictory. They answer different chronological questions. From the death and burial count, Thursday daylight is day 1. Jesus is crucified, dies, and is buried before sunset. Thursday night is night 1. Friday daylight is day 2. Friday night is night 2. Saturday daylight is day 3. Saturday night after sunset is night 3. From the calendar perspective, Thursday is the crucifixion day. Friday is the high Sabbath. Saturday is the weekly Sabbath. And after Saturday sunset, the first day of the week begins. Therefore, Saturday night can be both the 3rd night in the sign of Jonah count and the beginning of the first day of the week by Jewish calendar reckoning. These are not competing systems. One identifies the third night of the burial sign. The other identifies the calendar day on which the tomb was discovered open. Friday is strongest where the third day is understood by simple inclusive counting. But Friday fails the three-night requirement of Matthew 12:40. Wednesday is strongest on the spice text and can supply 3 nights. But Wednesday tends to overshoot the third-day framework if the resurrection occurs after the weekly Sabbath. Thursday does not remove every interpretive question, but it avoids the fatal weaknesses of both Friday and Wednesday. Therefore, Thursday is not chosen because it has no tension at all. It is chosen because it best satisfies the controlling sign and creates the fewest serious problems when all views are weighed by the same standard. The traditional Friday crucifixion view has historical weight and should not be ignored. Early Christian tradition widely associated the crucifixion with Friday. That tradition is historically significant. However, tradition must still be tested against the gospel timing statements. If Friday cannot naturally produce 3 nights, then historical tradition alone cannot settle the matter. The purpose of this study is not to dismiss tradition. The purpose is to test the proposed chronologies by the text itself. Now we come to the final conclusion. The controlling statement is Matthew 12:40, 3 days and 3 nights. That sign must not be reduced to fit a tradition that cannot naturally account for the nights. Friday explains the third-day language by inclusive counting, but it fails the 3-night requirement. Wednesday supplies the 3 nights and handles the spice passages well, but it tends to extend beyond the third-day framework if Jesus rises after the weekly Sabbath. Thursday provides the best harmonization. The most plausible reconstruction is this. Jesus was crucified on Thursday during the daylight portion of the preparation day. He died and was buried before sunset. That day counted as day 1, consistent with his statement, "Today you shall be with me in paradise." Friday was the High Sabbath connected with unleavened bread. Saturday was the weekly Sabbath. After the Sabbath ended at sunset Saturday, the first day of the week began. Jesus rose after the Sabbath and before sunrise, during the dark portion of the first day of the week. Therefore, the strongest overall conclusion is this. Jesus Christ was most plausibly crucified on Thursday and rose after the Sabbath ended, before sunrise on the first day of the week. The Bible does not explicitly say the word Thursday, but when Matthew 12:40, the third-day text, the after 3 days text, John 19:31, Luke 23:43, the Sabbath passages, the spice passages, and John 20 verse 1 are all weighed together, Thursday stands as the strongest harmonization of the gospel chronology. That is the conclusion of this study.